there is a question which will say, I have a discussion on scrap of material. I want to have a discussion on scrap of material versus scrap arising out of manufacturing process. Let's first understand what this is. I'm buying raw material. Purpose of buying the raw material is to use in manufacturing and complete. There's nothing in the screen. Please listen. Coming to this, what we are doing here is, I buy a raw material. After buying the raw material, I use it in my manufacturing process. In the process, some scrap comes out and then I sell it. Sometimes what will happen is, I buy the raw material. I don't even use it. Because something is wrong with that raw material. Something is wrong with that raw material. I don't want garbage in, garbage out. So I don't use the raw material. If you are scrapping the raw material as it is, then this will be deducted in direct material cost calculation. This will be subtracted where? In direct material cost calculation. This will be subtracted in direct material cost calculation. You put it in the manufacturing. After that, anything happens, then you please subtract it after your gross net works cost. So if there is any scrap of material, it will impact my prime cost calculation. If there's no scrap of material, scrap arising out of manufacturing process, then ultimately it will impact. See, if you deducted direct material, ultimately it will go and reduce my cost of production. Ultimately the same effect will happen, but prime cost will change. Because if you subtract this in this question, if you subtract scrap of material in this place, prime cost would have gone down, direct material would have gone down, prime cost would have gone down, ultimately COP would have gone down, ultimately cost of production would have gone down. Whether you subtract here or you subtract earlier does not matter from a COP point of view, but it will matter where? It will matter from a point of view of prime cost. So some exam question will give you and say calculate prime cost. So if you don't subtract it earlier and subtract it later, prime cost will go wrong. So scrap of material. So to cut it short, if question says sale of scrap, if the word used is sale of scrap, separate line item. Sale of scrap arising out of manufacturing process, separate line item, no problem. Sale of processed product, separate line item. But if they use the word scrap of material, scrap of raw material, if they use words like scrap of material or scrap of raw material, this will be deducted from raw material cost. Very important concept. Because of this, if you make an error, your prime cost will go wrong. ICI, I think in the recent mock test paper, tested this, and in one of the MCQ, what is the prime cost was there? In one of the multiple choice question, what is prime cost? So if you did not subtract it there, your prime cost will go wrong. So classification, if you do wrong, it will impact. In the end, see, let's assume I put something of admin and selling in admin. Ultimately, my COS may not get impacted. Wrong classification will not impact the last item, but it can impact anything in between. So if you see the word sale of scrap arising out of manufacturing process, scrap of processed product, sale of defective production, all that please write it as separate line item in the cost sheet. But if I see a word called scrap of material or scrap of raw material, then this will go where? This will go in my direct material cost calculation. In direct material, you will write opening stock, purchase, incidental expense, less closing stock, less scrap of material, less closing stock, less. Question just uses the word scrap, no problem, separate line item. This question which we did had sale of scrap. I did not discuss anything because I know it is a separate line item. I wanted to discuss this because in question 3 you will see a surprise element. In question 3 when we do, you will see this item coming in. I'll again explain. If you have any scrap which is arising out of a manufacturing process, this is what? Separate item in cost sheet and deducted while computing what? Cost of production. However, if raw material is scrapped even before production, the same should be deducted where? In my raw material cost. Should be deducted where? In my raw material cost. Again, I'm talking about wordings. Sale of scrap, no problem. Sale of scrap arising out of manufacturing process, no problem. Say scrap of finished product, no problem. Processed product, no problem. Defective production, no problem. Finished product, no problem. But if you scrap raw material, even if you scrap WIP means processing has started. WIP means processing is started. All that is separate line item. Only effect is scrap of material or scrap of raw material. If such words are used in the question, please take it to where? On the direct material cost calculation. Any doubts in this?